Hi, this is Peter Purcell, and welcome to another Jargon podcast where we are providing clarity to commonly misunderstood business jargon. So today I'm here with Katy, Wyrick.
Hey Peter, thanks for having me.
Well, thank you. So another voice for those three listeners who are tired of hearing the same people over and over again. And what we're going to talk about today is P cards. And the reason why we're bringing P cards to the forefront is based on a number of discussions that we've had with a variety of companies. There seems to be a lot of kind of confusion given the options that P cards actually provide. And, there's, do you issue them to a lot of people? Do you issue them to less people? How do you split out your organizations? When do you use T&E versus P card versus fuel cards, etc.? How do you limit them and the like? So for those of you that are about to drop off because you think this is a boring topic, we're going to talk about three things. Katy's going to share with us, the benefits of using P cards, talk a little bit about risk and mitigation, which actually is a favorite topic of mine, and then how to roll out the P cards. So Katy, let's start. Based on the fact that you're part of the brain trust here and you're very, very smart, talk to us a little bit about the benefits of a P card. Why would I even consider using a P card?
Sure. So a P card, P stands for procurement. A lot of times people think it stands for purchasing, but really you purchase using a T&E card, a travel and entertainment card, a P card, a fuel card. And it's important to separate them and delineate them as separate cards so that you can focus on the procuring of the operational purchases. That's what a P card should be. And some of the main benefits of having a P card is being able to give the operations team the ability to make quick purchasing decisions on the job, emergency situations. All of those benefits exist to put that ability in their hands. From a financial perspective and back office operations, it gives an organization the ability to reduce those high volume, low dollar POs. The ones that come in thousands and hundreds of thousands annually can be eliminated, which saves a ton of time for the accounting group too.
Okay, fair enough. So it's kind of like I'm a driver and I'm between Midland and Odessa. It's about 3 o'clock in the morning. I have a blowout. The last thing I want to do is to have to go and get a PO to get my tire replaced.
Exactly.
And by the way, since I'm not rolling, I'm not making money. Whether I'm not getting equipment to the well site or the job site or, something along those lines.
Yep. And emergency use is a big benefit, but also the day-to-day purchasing. So anything, you set a threshold. You can say $1,000. Anything under $1,000, we expect you to use a P card. Don't invoice us for something that's going to be so minute, because those add up. They just start stacking and it bogs everybody down, all the back and forth of tying the PO to the invoice once it comes in. There's a lot of work that goes into that.
Yeah, and I think there was kind of an interesting benchmark done a few years ago that when you create a PO, it can cost over $100 just when you think of just creating the PO itself. And then processing the invoice is like another $175. So what you're saying makes a lot of sense. If I'm buying a $50, case of oil for maintenance, it seems to me I'm paying more for internal processing if I have to go through create a PO, create a receiver, create an invoice, or just create a PO and create an invoice.
Yep. And it simplifies, the technology now that these banks use. You can actually default your GL coding. When the transaction comes in on the statement, it's automatically coded to the most likely accurate GL coding. You have the ability to reclass, but those reclasses are minor. So it takes a lot of that coding burden and reclassification off of the accounting group as well.
So does that mean that if we start using P cards, if we're a company, we're an oil field services company or industrial services company or just really any company, if I start using P cards and my GL classes are more correct than they have been, doesn't that help me down the line? I have better visibility into what I'm actually spending, where am I spending, and then when I start thinking about job profitability, now my interest is piqued, right?
Exactly. So visibility into spend is a huge benefit of rolling out a P card program and separating from the T&E program or fuel cards. Having that delineation and restricting the card use that way, you have the ability to control what's being charged to the card, but also that clear visibility into, how different field locations are purchasing.
So you bring up an interesting point. You just talked about 3 different cards. You talked about fuel cards, you talked about T&E cards, and you talked about P cards. Can you spend a second and tell me when, it seems to me, I've seen companies that do all their quote unquote P card purchases through a T&E card, and then it's up to the employee to split it out, right? Mm-hmm. And we've seen that in some oilfield services companies. And then we've seen some go to, the other side of the spectrum, and neither are wrong. I'm wondering, maybe you have a different opinion. I'm thinking neither are wrong, but one says, okay, everything goes through T&E, and you do your classification through your T&E system, which maybe you start running into class issues. I don't know, GL class issues. But then there's others that are like, there's very different delineation. T&E is truly travel and entertainment, right? Fuel cards are truly fuel cards, tied to a particular vehicle, and, you can't use it outside of that. And then you have the P card, which, you're buying batteries or, whatever, emergency buys. What makes sense there? Because that may be where confusion lies a little bit.
Right. And the biggest burden from the cardholder perspective is like, do I really have to keep 3 credit cards in my wallet? Seems excessive, but in reality, not many cardholders will have a T&E card and a P card. It's less common.
Well, I'm opening my wallet in front of you, Katy, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 credit cards. I shouldn't admit this, right? Because one of them is my HSA card, one of them is a debit card. But yeah, you're right. It is a pain to carry too many cards. Right?
And sometimes it's just important, and I'm kind of getting into the rollout, the implementation topic, but it's important when you're identifying your rules. Like what does your policy say? There are situations you may have a card holder that should only really have a P card, but they book hotels or like man camps for their customer. So defining these different scenarios and setting up your restrictions based on your organization. And in turn, having the different cards, you give the cardholders the ability to purchase legitimately, but you also are protecting any sort of risks that may come of it, any sort of misuse or fraud. When it's all together, you have to have a pretty big group reviewing all the transactions and maintaining those cards.
So what you're saying when you say all together, if I were to use my T&E to buy everything, then what you're saying is it becomes a little more onerous at the back end to make sure everything is properly. I'm changing your words. I'm sorry, but maybe but to make sure that things are properly classed and properly charged and the like.
Exactly. In addition to the increased risk on the organization. So you have a lot more freedom to purchase anything if you don't have these restrictions in place, that things can fall through the cracks a little bit easier.
Okay.
And I'm jumping again ahead to risks, but...
No, that's fine. I was actually going to go there. I said, since you brought up risk, let's talk about risk, because I think that a lot of people that I talk to, they're a little hesitant to issue P cards because they're worried about, employee turnover. They're going to take a P card with them and use it inappropriately. That's an extreme. But then within the company is, if I issue P cards, how do I know people aren't misusing them? And even down to fuel cards, right? Because everything we talk about even relates to fuel cards. How do I know that person didn't take the fuel card and fill up their own vehicle, instead of a company asset? But so, let's talk about risk since you went there.
A lot of it comes down to accountability. So accountability first on the cardholder, providing really clear training and guidelines on how they should be using the cards, but also on the approvers. So the managers should be reviewing every transaction when the statement comes through, but also making sure that receipts are loaded. The cardholder can be given this freedom, but they have to be held accountable to reduce these risks, fraud, misuse, anything like that.
So talk to me a little bit, and I don't mean to jump into rollout because we'll talk about that next, but when I start thinking about risks and different types of risk, it's always about misuse, right? What about misclassification? That may not be as big a deal, is it? It's really misuse is the big risk.
Yeah, the classification, again, a lot of these programs now have default options where it can recognize based on the merchant or the vendor where it should be coded. There may be slight changes. I don't think the coding is as much of a risk there. Duplicate invoices, though, that's a big risk.
Yeah, we were talking about that before. Explain that a little bit. Can you explain the entire scenario? Because I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't think I'd ever heard of that.
Yeah, so let's say a company has, and as they should, these corporate accounts. You set up corporate accounts to receive discounts, or maybe there's no discounts associated. There should be some sort of standard in place on when to use these corporate accounts and when not to. Because the risk here is what can happen is if a cardholder goes to Home Depot and there's a corporate account, they put the purchase on the corporate account, but then they swipe their card. So then Home Depot also sends an invoice to the company, and there's a duplicate payment. You're paying 2 times for the same transaction.
Yeah, and that happens fairly often, question mark?
I think the risk is you don't really know how often it could happen. In theory, that transaction should be deducted from the invoice because it's already been treated as a point of sale transaction.
Right.
In reality, mistakes happen, and there is, we've seen at clients that there is a potential risk that could possibly be substantial. Just something to be aware of. Those pennies add up.
Yeah, I would assume so. And when you think of the volume, again, you're talking about low dollar, high volume. Mm-hmm. But in the end, when I have high volume, low dollar, it could still be high dollar, right? So
what to do there is really don't associate a transaction with a corporate account. If a discount is provided or available, don't use your P card. So just understanding when to use a card and when to use the corporate account.
So really, we're sort of sneaking into rolling it out and how you do that, right? Because that sounds to me like a training issue.
Mm-hmm. And training is extremely important. Understanding when to use what card, especially when you are rolling this out. You don't want on day one there to be any misconception on how to use a card because your phone's going to be ringing off the hook when somebody's trying to purchase a hotel on a P card or vice versa. So limiting your restrictions early on can be helpful.
And then tighten down later, maybe?
Yeah, the look back. So
okay.
Use the cards for a couple months. Let everybody get used to how to use cards, especially if it's a brand new program. They're going to have a lot of questions. But then looking back, give it 3 months and understand how people are using the cards, how vendors and merchants are being coded to different GL transactions, and then tighten it up later on.
So it almost sounds like as you roll it out, and then we can talk a little bit about who should get a P card, who doesn't, department card, etc. And by the way, as we talk about rollout, please keep in mind we're almost everything from a Trinergy perspective. As we make recommendations, we always have our eye on risk mitigation. That's why the risk mitigation section probably was a little short in this discussion. But when we talk about rollout, we are, or you are suggesting risk mitigation. And actually, Katy and I had that conversation before we started this. But it sounds like when you first start to roll out, a lot of babysitting, probably wrong term, but you're going to have a lot of oversight or just maybe have extra staff available or employees available to kind of watch what's going on. And it sounds like as you get deeper into the program and you really start setting the limits and closing the gates, if you will, to the different pastures, for lack of a better term, terrible analogy. But, my mind's already at the farm, forgive me. But then your back office staff kind of can back off a little bit, because I'm assuming in the end of all this, and I'm not trying to wrap the conversation, but you want to save money in the end, right? And you don't want to have to create a huge back office function to see oversight. So yeah. I'm thinking that's kind of where you're going.
Yeah, so your program admin will be flooded with questions, how to activate the cards. If you're doing a company-wide rollout, it could be several hundred cards being rolled out. So having that support is really important and that quick response time, especially up front, but even ongoing, the support time a lot of these operations don't have normal business hours. They aren't a 9 to 5 type of work. So middle of the night, the car tire blows out. Emergencies happen that you have to be pretty responsive. So having a plan and a support in place that can truly support the cardholders when they need it.
Okay, so let's just take a kind of a half a step back. Who gets P cards, and what kind of P cards are out there, Katy? I mean, in your opinion, like, if you're a company, you have 16,000 employees or you have 1,000 employees, how do I know who to give the cards to? And then how should they be allowed to use them? And then how should they be monitored? When I think of a rollout.
Yeah, a lot of at Trinity, our emphasis is working with our clients and being collaborative. So there's obviously a right and a wrong way. You don't want to give a card to every single person, and you don't want to limit cards too much as well. So we come with an approach that is consistent, but understanding the type of company. And every company will be slightly different just in what they provide, as if they're a services company or what have you.
Okay.
So department cards are a great option sometimes, where you could have one card at a field location, or you can have one card within the marketing group. It could be by location or by department. And the benefit of that is you reduce the number of cards being issued, so the maintenance of those cards, the support of those card holders, and a little bit more control as well. Not every single person should have that ability to make those purchasing decisions on behalf of the company.
Okay, so that's like almost organizational level cards, kind of what I stumbled over at the beginning in my introduction, right? But does anybody in the department use it, or do you typically try to keep it to one person or like 2 or 3 people who really know when and when not to use it? I mean, what are your thoughts there?
Again, it's discretionary. So
when you say discretionary by company management or discretionary? Yes. Okay, got it.
And also card holders. I mean, when we work with our clients, they know their employees, they know their culture, and that has to be considered when issuing cards. Department cards, I use the marketing example. Let's say the marketing director has the department card. He or she can lend it off to somebody else on their team, but that person's still going to be the card holder, will be accountable for the coding and the approvals, everything like that. They are accountable.
So they're the point of control.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about operations, folks. I'm assuming that's the next group, or just employees. How do you pick employees, and then how do you give it to them? How do you train them? How do you monitor them, etc.?
Yeah, so to determine who should get it, again, just goes back to what is the service offering. A lot of times employees are disjointed in their locations, so department card doesn't make sense because they are going to be put in situations where they need to make the transaction. They can't drive 2 hours to go get their card. So understanding how the organization is set up is really important. Spend limits, making that consistent. If you say anything under $1,000 needs to go on a P card, that's great. But what if something's $2,500? Who, at what level can you increase spend limits to account for these larger purchases or emergency purchases?
Okay, because you don't want a $2,500 seal, let's say. You're offshore driller. You don't want a $2,500 seal stop $500,000 a day rig, right?
Permitting. These big capital projects too. Capital spend won't typically go on a P card, but there are emergency situations that you have
in the middle of a project.
Right. That you're going to have to quickly make that decision to keep the project moving forward.
Well, that's fair, and then that's why you can do reclass, right? That's why
Exactly.
you have that kind of oversight. Okay, so training. Major training, little training, cheat sheets. What are hints and tips for rolling it out?
Yeah, so training should be focused on card use, making it very clear on how the card should be used and how it should not be used, and what's that approval process. A 30-minute training is typically enough time, but allowing the cardholders to ask any questions that they have as well. So doing a formal training where you roll out the program and having that open line of communication, making sure that you're clearly communicating the card use.
Cool.
Cheat sheet is something that you
Yeah.
also mentioned.
Yeah.
We recently, on a recent P card rollout, we made cheat sheets that were wallet-sized cheat sheets. And on one side, it had how do you use a T&E card, and on the other side was how do you use a P card. And we color-coded it to align with how their T&E card was red and their P card was blue.
Which doesn't help those that are colorblind, by the way.
well.
For those of us that are, but
It also said really big on the top.
oh, okay, thank you. Yeah, because that's what I would
There
need.
was no
Yeah.
mistaking.
Yeah.
Yeah, so having that available just to eliminate all the questions coming through, giving them that ability to quickly reference a little card that's in their wallet on how to appropriately use which card.
Sounds good. So it sounds like we've kind of come to a point where we've talked about the benefits of a P card, and it sounds like if it's done correctly, you can definitely save money, and it makes it a little bit easier for operations to get what they need to continue making the revenue that the company wants them to make.
And then a huge emphasis there I just want to make is that importance of defining for each organization is going to be slightly different. So putting in the work up front, don't just issue a bunch of cards and
Right.
have a free-for-all approach. Make sure you understand exactly who should use it, when, where, how. Define the process and the policies before you even go into anything system or rollout training related.
Okay, fair enough. So sounds like we've got a pretty good view on, the benefits, the risks, mitigation, how to roll it out. For those listeners that have more questions, first of all, we thank you for your time. Katy, I know we just pulled you out of project meetings to do this podcast,
No
so I
worries.
appreciate that. But if folks have questions, just email Katy with a Y, Katy, at Trinergy.com, or you can email me and I will give you a completely garbled answer at Peter at Trinergy.com. So we appreciate your time.
Thank you, Peter.